Hey all, Reed here with Big Strong Book, here today to talk about The Loser by Thomas Bernhard. This is a book, this is an author that I, of course, as with so many on this channel, have been meaning to get around to for quite some time. After I read Malloy by Samuel Beckett earlier in this year, I figured, Bernhard had to be close behind. I think others had recommended Bernhard to me on this channel before. He is cut from the same cloth as Beckett, as Kafka too. And he is one of those that you ultimately find yourself kind of coming back around towards. He is almost a monolith in his own way of Austrian literature and the German language literature, certainly of the 20th century and perhaps of all time. And it is a kind of style that, of course, you have to prepare yourself for. You have to sit down, and The Loser is the type of book, and I'm sure Bernhard's other novels are like this, where you almost have to read it in one sitting. I did not. I kind of split it up into over. I read this book over the course of about 4 days. It's a very short book. It's only about 170 pages, and in a sense, Bernhard, or at least The Loser, is easier. It is more digestible than Beckett, but it is more digestible on the initial read. I think it is much more difficult to parse through when you get below the surface. Beckett is, at least in my view, the inverse. Beckett is more difficult on the surface. He is more abrasive. He is more lashing out at the reader in terms of how he structures his stream of consciousness style. And Bernhard, it is simpler. It is easier. Bernhard works a lot in this novel with repetition, repeating themes and phrases, even though the themes themselves, and to just digest this whole work, I find it almost impossible for myself. Granted, that might be because I didn't take notes. I never take notes when I read something for the first time, or I rarely do. The most recent example of me doing that would have been something like 2666, but you almost have to when you read a book like that is so expansive, both literally and then thematically. But a book like this, it's almost as if you have to read it a few times probably. And so I don't think within this review alone I can do Bernhard nor this work justice in how I describe it and in my takeaways from it, and as I've let it digest. It's been a couple of days, which might be a mistake in doing this review 2 days after I've read something, because then it starts almost immediately to fade from the mind, because there is no break. Bernhard, of course, again, cut from the same cloth as Beckett, and before him Joyce, perhaps even Faulkner as well, the great modernist traditions of constant, not just stream of consciousness, but constant in its formation. This entire book is one paragraph. Unlike figures like the recent Nobel laureate Krasznahorkai, it's not one sentence. It's one block, and so it's hard to find a stopping place within this. So again, as I said, this is a book where you almost have to read it in one sitting. But this book is about one thing, and it is about many things. On the surface, this is about wannabe piano virtuosos who, when they face up against Glenn Gould, when they run up against somebody of incomparable genius, and somebody whose genius is on another level of others, or at least his popularity. People will have their own opinions of Glenn Gould, but when somebody is head and shoulders above all else in terms of their prolific output, in terms of how both the critical eye and the public eye view them, and in the type of persona that they create for themselves, it becomes difficult for others in that same field to to compete, to be on that same level. And so we have the unnamed narrator, and then we also have Wertheimer. Wertheimer is arguably the central point of this. Glenn Gould is often the cause of Wertheimer's effect, or the effectual change that he takes and then does not take in his life. And there's a mirrored or a kind of inverse image that is taken. Wertheimer, it seems like in this book, often seems to blame his shortcomings on Glenn Gould, blames his directions in life on Glenn Gould, but then ultimately becomes powerless to take agency for his own decisions. But this book is, again, it's about two virtuosos who, while they're studying at the Mozarteum, meet Glenn Gould, and they all, in a certain respect, become friends, or at least become distanced colleagues or distanced admirers. And eventually, the narrator and this character of Wertheimer, they draw away from the piano, they draw away from their craft, as Glenn Gould, of course, continues at it. Glenn Gould, as we know, forsakes the public performance in favor of the studio recording, the studio realm, in which he has full control over every aspect of what goes into a piece. And the narrator admires Gould for that. But Gould is somebody who, and I think, can then, because the narrator and Wertheimer almost elevate him to another standpoint, Gould's word becomes gospel. He deems Wertheimer, teasingly refers to him as the title, the loser. The title character, the loser, is Wertheimer. But the loser is somebody who loses in their chosen occupation, their chosen desire. I don't, Bernhard, through the narrator, isn't trying to say that all art is futile. He is not trying to say that, but I think he is almost pointing to the kind of death wish that those in the creative process have. Maybe that ultimate wish is to, as the narrator states within this book, that Gould apparently dies of a stroke in the middle of the Goldberg variations. The Goldberg variations that defined his career, one could argue, his various recordings of them. But then the fact that Wertheimer and the narrator meet Gould when he is, as he is displaying, as he is performing the Goldberg variations, the narrator surmises that had he, or had Wertheimer, never come into personal contact with Glenn Gould, they might have continued to become virtuosos. But would they have been virtuosos of the same pedigree as Gould? Perhaps not. And yet they forsake their passion, or was it even a passion to begin with? Is a passion something that you can so easily throw away? We have the narrator who donates his Steinway to one of his students, and is so gleeful in giving up, and he takes upon himself to just write, but then he finds himself obsessing over Glenn Gould. He cannot get away from the person who is the cause of his own discomfort, of his own sadness, or of his own place in life. He can never get away from that. Likewise, Wertheimer, even though he places his own discomfort and his own unsatisfaction, and he thrusts that upon others, upon his sister, upon others in his life. And he then, at the end of his life, of course, it's known that Wertheimer commits suicide, but as he then purchases the piano to then, but the piano that is so poorly tuned that he forces then others to listen to himself, and he does this again at the end of his life, at the way end of his life, plays so poorly and on purpose to draw others both towards him and away from him. There's so much at work within this, and I know I'm not doing the work of Bernhard or what his intent is justice here, as this is a book that must not only must it marinate, but you also have to approach it, I think, multiple times. And now I know. Now I know for when I approach Bernhard once more in the near future. This is something that one could spend a lifetime probably talking about, but then not make any progress in talking about it. It's the similar conundrum that I had with Beckett. I love Beckett, but his was the one where it is difficult. It is perhaps easier to just let marinate than it is to access the work in the first place. With Bernhard, it is easier to access the work, more difficult to talk about it. But they have an inverted difficulty. And I respect Bernhard for that. I respect this kind of uncompromising prose style, this uncompromising artistic ability. But then it certainly becomes difficult to talk about. One thing is clear, obviously, that Bernhard hates Austria, and I knew that he never wanted his work or his plays to be performed in Austria after he died in the 80s. But yeah, this is a book. It is a book about destruction. It is a book about self-destruction. It is a book about obsession and searching for a meaning and searching for a purpose. When, if you forsake that passion and that purpose, you will find yourself just running up against the ultimate brick wall. And that's what I find myself when I'm trying to talk about it. It is something that I almost cannot talk about, cannot really try to discern. So apologies for that, but yeah, Bernhard is somebody who I will reapproach again. I will reapproach his works just as I will with Beckett. But he is somebody that needs time, and now I know that for the future. So yeah, it is something difficult to talk about. Note to self: I will take notes next time. So, and that's all I can really say. So, The Loser by Thomas Bernhard. If you have read it, let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you guys next time.